Hello. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to The Reason We Learn and Success Without School. I'm Deb Philman. This is Hannah Frankman. If you've not been here before and this is your first time, please consider subscribing to the channel so you can be notified when we have more shows and we make other content. Please like and share this broadcast so we can get as many people chatting with us as possible so they can get their questions answered. And we're going to jump right in today to our topic to maximize our time. Hannah, please explain what we are discussing today.
We're talking about kind of a controversial topic, actually. We're going to debunk a lot of the kind of standard beliefs around how you need to structure your K through 5, especially education. The philosophy applies to everything, but we're going to especially focus at 2K through 5. Why all the standard, like the year-by-year standards, don't actually matter, and why they may actually be hurting your kid instead of helping them, and why you should not pay much attention to them as you're designing your K through 5 education for your kids.
Now, a lot of people are going to hear this, Hannah, and they're going to say, why should I listen to you?
Because I turned out
okay. Oh, okay. No, but that's a really good reason. The government told me this was important. Come on.
Yeah. Do you know how many times the government's changed the food pyramid? Just because they say something is important doesn't mean that it's actually the best thing for your kids to follow.
That's right. Good answer. But I liked your other answer. What was your other answer again?
Because I turned out okay.
Right.
I think so when my parents started homeschooling me, there definitely was like a pretty strong adherence to, okay, what are kids supposed to learn in first grade? Let's make sure that Hannah actually does those things and is on track. And there were a few reasons for this. One was so that if anybody ever came around and checked up on me, they'd know that I was doing okay. And some of it was just to like make sure that I was on track to be a successful adult by the time I graduated. And some of it was so that if we changed our minds and decided that homeschooling didn't work, I could go back into the traditional system and fit right in. But as we kind of progressed through the years, our adherence to the kind of standard requirements on a grade by grade basis loosened, and then kind of tightened up again when I hit high school, because I thought I was on the college track. So we were a little more like, okay, we probably should make sure that you have your 4 years of math and your 4 years of English and all of these things. But that was because there was a very specific goal in mind that I thought I needed these things for. But it definitely, like, there was a lot of adjusting and making an education path that fit me, and even more so for my younger sister. And we both turned out totally okay. We're fully functioning adults who have decent grammar and decent spelling, and we can read at an acceptable level, and we can do our basic arithmetic, and like we're surviving just fine in the real world. And I think there are so many examples of kids who don't follow the standard curriculum on the like very rigid and segmented. By the middle of your second grade year, you are supposed to know this many things and this many, et cetera, like, you know, whatever, and turn out totally okay, and actually far better equipped to handle the real world than kids who just go through the system. So it's not nearly as important of a measure of how well your kids are going to do in the real world than people think it is. And it's very arbitrary, and it's often actually really detrimental for kids to be too focused on it.
Well, you bring something up that I've been wanting to mention for a long time on the channel, because I like to ask those kind of questions nobody asks. Why do we graduate? Like, why do we have, and it's a rhetorical question, I'm going to answer it myself, but we have this thing called graduation from high school, and now they've got graduation from elementary school, graduation from every school. You know, we have these graduations. Well, would there be such a thing if school weren't, you know, compulsory and or seen as a credentialing process as opposed to a learning process for the child? So it's something I really want people to think about. What we talk about in this show is success without school. Success meaning being a person, you know, like as you said, you know, a fully functioning, contributing member of, you know, society, and like a healthy, self-actualized adult, all that. is the measure of success, not necessarily got into college, got into college or got a diploma or, these other measurements, which are to a large degree kind of arbitrary. And are we really credentialing our 17-year-old? What are they credentialed to do out of this 13-year process? So if we think about graduation, I think that's where it begins. I think that's where the parent's brain starts going on the hamster treadmill of, well, what do they need to know by this year? And then what do they need to know by this year? And what do they need to, because they feel like they're up against some kind of clock, some kind of wall called graduation, and to get that diploma. And if I don't, even on a transcript, if I don't do these things, my kid's not going to get there. And if they don't get there, oh my God, I completely failed. My child's a failure. All bad things. And so if we first answer the question, like, why do I want my children to graduate? In other words, to be whatever age they're going to be and finish with something called school. Because remember, the government's saying you're compelled to have them do something in education until they're, different states are different, but like 16, I think, is the average age where you can officially say, I'm done with this, without being truant. But, what do you want? What do you want them to be? Leave them out of it for a second, right? And then I think what the conversation we're trying to have here is a little easier to have in your own head or with your child or with the rest of your family, because you're gearing it towards your child, something the school doesn't do, right? The school says, I don't care whether you're ready or not. You're doing arithmetic, you're doing, addition in 5th grade, and, you're doing multiplication in this grade. And if you're not done, we're moving on. So you have the benefit. And I think this might be what Sage News is talking about. It says students learn in different ways. Do you mean homeschool give a better opportunity to focus on that? I think that's what you mean. Mm-hmm. And yes, it says homeschool give a better. Yes. And that's kind of what we're here to talk about, is when you do home-based education, you do have the opportunity to go at your pace or your child's pace and to choose the subject matter according to their readiness for the subject matter, right?
Yeah, to your point about graduation, I do think that there's something to be said for like having some type of celebratory benchmark for.
I didn't mean the event. I just meant like, what do we even call it that?
I know. I just think that this is an important, like, if you're thinking about designing your kids' education, there's one point that I want to bring up here. I'm not disagreeing with you at all. It is something that Laura and Jeff Sandifer of ACT, who the founders of Acton Academy, talk about a lot, the importance of ritual. And like, that is important, to have these benchmarks that you're celebrating, like you've accomplished this thing and you've reached this milestone. It's a very human desire to want that and to be moved by celebrating that, but it should be something meaningful. That's not just like an arbitrary, congratulations, you have been in school for 180 days. We're going to have a party now. Like, it's not, that's very arbitrary, and you want it to be something meaningful. But I think, yeah, like when you're designing your kids' education, you want to come back to like, what is important? And there's a lot that you need to re-examine there. And quite frankly, nothing in our education system has been examined deeply for a very long time. And I get a lot of pushback on this on Twitter, where I'll say something like that and I'll have teachers come into the comments and disagree with me and say, no, we're absolutely changing all kinds of things over the past 20 years. And I'm like, yeah, sure, you've added computers to the classrooms and like you've done all this stuff, but that's not what I mean. I mean, going back to like the deep fundamentals and saying on a first principles level, what are we teaching here and why is it important? Like, what is the argument for teaching kids spelling in the 21st century when everybody has spell check? Like, what's your argument for this? I'm not saying that we shouldn't do it. I'm just saying like we have to have a reason why it's important now. And we have to like build it into the curriculum intentionally, not just grandfather it in because it's what we've always done.
And conversely, don't arbitrarily get rid of it either.
Exactly.
Because what happens if you don't have an argument for something, if you've just been arbitrarily doing a thing, then you can find one day you run into, time frames. Oh, I got to cover this. The standard says that. And you arbitrarily get rid of something that you later find out 5 years, 10 years on the road, oopsie, like they threw out cursive as an example. And I know this is an unpopular example, but there are at least 13 different actual reasons why cursive and teaching cursive is beneficial for the child. And some of them are backed up by like brain research, believe it or not. But because it was just nobody does that anymore and it's not important and everybody's on a computer, it was like, let's just get rid of it, because they didn't really understand the reasons we were doing it in the first place. And now we're kind of playing catch up on a lot of things that it helped teach other than the actual cursive. In other words, there were certain things going on in the brain, certain neural pathways being developed through that process that got thrown out with the bathwater, so to speak. And so I think deeply examining, why do we teach this, helps us understand what to keep, what to get rid of, what to modify, etc.
Yeah, I was reading last night about high school, like senior year high school English classes where they don't teach any literature at all. They just spend the whole year writing college application essays, which is another really great example of something that feels superfluous. Like, why are we teaching kids all these dense books in language that nobody ever uses anymore, but that also have these deep fundamental human truths that are extremely important for kids to be exposed to and to learn how to think about in situations that they need to learn how to navigate. Like, you read Crime and Punishment, it is not some abstract, obscure, far removed novel. It is a deep exploration of the human psyche that teaches you a lot about how your own brain works. It's an important book for a reason. And there's a lot of stuff like that that's getting thrown out. So I think that's an important point for us to make here, is that we're not advocating for just tossing things out because, well, school said my kid has to know all these things. So but I don't think they're important, so I'm not going to do it. That's not the point that we're making at all. I personally, like on a personal level, am very pro like a lot of the pieces of a classical education, because I think that they've stood the test of time for a reason, in the same way that the classics have stood the test of time for a reason, because there's a lot of really great substance to them. There's a lot of really great substance to most of the pieces of a classical education. And I think like a really solid liberal arts foundation is really important. But all of that being said, a lot of the timeline standards are super arbitrary. And a lot of the sort of the way that we think about exposing our kids to all of this stuff is very baked into the system of having these standard timelines and these sort of arbitrary benchmarks where, well, my kid is 11, so they need to know X, Y, and Z by now. And if they don't, my child is behind. It's like, no, maybe your kid just isn't curious about this yet. But when they're 13, they're going to be endlessly and insatiably curious about this thing. And they will go farther down the rabbit hole than they ever would if you pushed them. And I think that's like, I keep kind of skirting around this, but I think there's a lot of damage that's being done by forcing kids into things before they're ready. And I see this again and again, and I experienced it too. I can speak to this one firsthand because this was one of the things, this was one of the learning mistakes in like being the oldest child in my family and being the first homeschooler. My parents definitely, especially early on, definitely had some like, well, you're supposed to be doing basic spelling, basic grammar, basic math in elementary years. And I loved reading. So all of the spelling and the grammar stuff was really easy because I was learning all of this stuff anyway through reading books for fun. So that stuff just came very naturally to me. But I was not a math person. And I am entirely convinced that if I had been left on my own to my own devices, I would have hit a point at some point, probably in high school, where I realized that math was wildly fascinating. And I probably would have gone deep down the rabbit hole into learning about like different mathematical concepts and formulas and like understanding sort of the scientific implications of them. I think had I not had some preconceptions about math at that point in my life, I would have loved it, because I remember prepping for the SATs and thinking, this is actually really fun. I kind of like this, but I couldn't quite wrap my head around it, because when I was in like second and third grade, my parents gave me math worksheets to do. And they're like, you need to practice your math. You have to do a little bit of math every day. And it wasn't even that I didn't like math. I just found it kind of boring. I didn't see an application for it. It wasn't stretching my brain in an interesting way that was holding my attention. And I really resented being made to do it. So I remember I would go sit on the stairs with my math paper for the day, and I would draw all over it until you could barely see the math problems. And then finally I would do the math problems when I ran out of space to draw. And I remember my mom walking past saying, you could finish that in like 10 minutes and then you can go play. You can go do whatever you want. But I just could not bring myself to do the math problems. And it got worse and worse because the resentment just built. And to this day, I'm running like business numbers, and I'm just like, I really want to outsource this to somebody. I want to let somebody else do all of these numerical stuff because I just don't like it, because I have this built up resistance in my head. And I see this happen all the time to kids with reading, where they get pushed into reading before they're ready, and they hate reading for their entire lives, and they avoid it for their entire lives because they were forced into it. And I have yet to see a child who is resistant to reading. When left to their own devices, they don't naturally develop a hunger for reading by the age of 10 at the latest. I have yet to see a child not develop that. Like, as long as they're exposed to books and they're being read to, it's in your own interest to know how to read. And at some point you're going to hit a moment where you are curious about something and you can't go find that information on your own unless you know how to read. And all of a sudden you are very motivated and you will pick it up very quickly at that point. And
all of this presupposes, by the way, audience, that you are restricting the use of tech. So in other words, everything that we're talking about assumes that the child does not have access to their own smartphone that they can use at will at any time to do anything they want and to go, hey, Siri, answer this question, because that will fundamentally alter this curiosity that Hannah's talking about. It actually changes their brain. So, I mean, everything we're saying, and I really ought to make a big disclaimer for the show that just says everything we're telling you presupposes you're not giving your child a smartphone, and you limit their tech access, and you don't give them free reign of the television either. So, I mean, I can say watch documentaries, that there's a good use for these things,
absolutely.
But as supervised, limited, etc. I would like to validate something you said it's your strong suspicion that because you were pushed with math, that contributed. Your story is similar to mine in one respect. I went from a Montessori school in sort of preschool and early elementary, where you get to go where your curiosity takes you. And I spent about 85% of my time in the reading corner, reading books, like as fast as I would just sit and read the books, and I couldn't get enough. I mean, I would just read voraciously. And the other, I'd say then I'd spend another like 10% of my time doing arts and crafts, but like they had pretty high level, like pottery. You'd have to learn to throw pots and needlepoint, and you would do sewing. You did some pretty elaborate, like I knew how to knit by the time I was 7. I mean, we did some elaborate things. But math, as far as I got by the age of 8, was something called Cuisinaire Rods. Cuisinaire Rods are these colored coded rods, each representing different units. So you'd have a little white block that was a single unit, and a green one is 2 units, and so forth. And there are these colors that represent how many units. In other words, 1, 2, 3, whatever. All the way up to 10 is like a long stick. And I was working with those and kind of playing with those and experimenting with those. And everybody starts building towers. Okay. So everybody builds these graduated towers because you look, oh, look, I can go small to, big to large, or to small. And then from there, you start playing around with different patterns and different things. But I still mostly saw it as a pattern recognition kind of activity, not as a linear algebraic or, numerical thing. Yeah. But I was happy. But I was very happy, and I didn't feel like I was missing out on anything. And that's what we called math in the Montessori school. It's like, oh, are you doing some math? And I'm playing with Cuisinaire Rods. So I thought math was fun and good. And in fact, I went to the library and got myself a book on the history of mathematics. And there's a photograph somewhere of me up against a tree at probably about the age of 7, reading this big book about the history of mathematics all the way back to like, how we have the numerals that we have, Arabic numerals, all this stuff. So I was coming at it from that angle. And my parents got divorced and I got shoved arbitrarily into public school. It was like somebody threw cold water in my face and said, you are now in fourth grade. And this thing called fourth grade. And here is a math textbook. And here is this and that and the other. And on top of being a year younger than my peers, because my reading level was so crazy high, they couldn't put me in third grade. I would have had nothing to do because they were still teaching kids how to read. They put me in fourth. And right away, it's long division. They're doing long division. I hadn't learned my multiplication tables yet because I hadn't gotten there yet. We were going to get, I was going to get there, right? But I just hadn't.
Yeah.
So there I am, 8 years old, in fourth grade, smallest kid in the class, youngest kid in the class, being called up to the board to do a long division problem that looked like you might as well have just written ancient Greek in front of me and said, translate it. And I had to admit in front of a classroom of cackling children that I had absolutely no idea what I was supposed to do. I had no idea what it even meant, what division was. Like none of it had any meaning for me. And so my first experience with formal math was humiliation, shame, fear. And then even my teacher was like, you don't know this? Sit down. Somebody else come up and do this. So I saw math as my enemy from the earliest time that I was introduced to math in a school setting and like that. And it never got better. I had to get a tutor. I ended up learning through songs. I learned multiplication tables through Multiplication Rock, which was fantastic, by the way. But I still saw math as the enemy all the way through high school, college. And I only recently discovered in conversations with somebody who was a math teacher who showed me a copy of a math textbook, I think from, I want to say like the 50s or 60s. It was an algebra textbook, but it's mostly explained using words. So you have linear equations, but then like they would explain the directions. You're going to do this, because that. And I'm like, I would have totally gotten it. If somebody had introduced math to me this way, even if I had been much older, I might have thought math was the most, like you said, the most fascinating, fun thing in the world, like solving problems, solving puzzles. I loved that stuff. I loved puzzles. I couldn't get enough puzzles. So there wasn't anything wrong with my brain. There wasn't anything wrong with my ability to learn math. I just personally was not ready for worksheets, linear equations, the complete abstract representation of numeric, of mathematical concepts. It had absolutely held no interest for me. And I ended up spending the rest of my years of school learning less, being less happy, being frustrated, being depressed because you have to take math in school. And it was completely unnecessary. There was no reason why at the age of 8, I had to do long division. Right. So I just want to share that story with you because it's kind of like a few decades earlier, a very similar experience. And I hope people are listening and take this into account that, ask yourself why. Now, the question might then come, well, what would you recommend instead of? Isn't there an argument to be made that if you don't expose them at all? Well, remember I said there were Cuisinaire rods. And remember I said I was allowed to freely play with them. That's a mathematical manipulative. I was allowed to play with them. I was allowed to do puzzles. There were all kinds of materials lying around in our kind of math area of school. And I was allowed to interact with them as my curiosity dictated. It wasn't like I could just spend 100% of my time in the reading corner. These things drew my attention. They were colorful. They were interesting. I was going there on my own. So the answer is surround your children with rich experiences that touch on math, that might take advantage of what they're already interested to. Let's go to the library. Oh, there's a book on math, the history of math. Check it out. Let them come to it from wherever they are and the angle of their curiosity. And I really believe they'll surprise you.
Yeah, there's this weird belief that school is supposed to be hard and learning is supposed to be hard. And it's a very easy trap to fall into because we want our kids to push themselves and we want them to learn how to do hard things. That is absolutely important. But we because we want our kids to push themselves and we want them to grow and we want them to do as well as possible, we equate that with school being hard, but it doesn't have to be. And it shouldn't be for younger kids either. It's very detrimental to make school hard for young kids because it teaches them it builds these layers of resentment around learning, which are incredibly hard to undo. I've had fun experiences with math, and I still, 15 years after these experiences, 15, 17, 18, however many years, I still hate math because it's so deeply ingrained that math is unpleasant. And when we let kids learn things when they're ready, they will naturally push themselves because they're curious and they want to go farther and they want to learn more, but it won't feel hard. It will feel challenging. They will be able to feel their mental muscles stretching, but they will embrace the stretch because they are naturally excited about the things that they're learning. When you let your kids' readiness drive the education process is endlessly fascinating and fun. And
Or
that's what you want it to be.
If you introduce a purpose, you talked about the importance of ritual. So if you want them to feel that stretch in a subject matter area that they're already expressing interest in, but they're, just kind of going at a pace, and you can come up with, work with them to come up with a purpose-driven, project or goal or something, and then decide you're going to have a celebration when they get through it. Like, so there is something to be said for using the very young brain's ability to memorize. Like, so for example, when your kids are in the young elementary years, their brains are better able to memorize rote stuff, multiplication tables, the alphabet, there's a variety of things, even spelling of simple words. There are a variety of things they can memorize much more easily than starting that process when they're older. Now, you have to be quite a bit older for that to calcify, but there's something to be said for that. You can use songs, you can use art projects, you can use sports. There are many ways you can do it. It doesn't have to be sitting with a worksheet or flashcards. So it's kind of this weird thing of like, if what you want to do is you want to say, I want to take advantage of the fact that they're young and they like to repeat things over and over and they like to know stuff. Okay, that's fine. That's it. That there's an argument for that. But that doesn't follow that you're going to do it in this sterile, boring way, And so what I did with my kids was I said, let's do multiplication, but I found some like fun, like chants and things that we could do with songs and jump ropes and different stuff that we could do. And then we had like a little celebration when they learned the hard ones, like the 9s and the 8s and, like the 12s, the ones that are like, oh, that one's a little hard. So it's like, you got this, you nailed this, you got all of these down, or do it visually, fill out a chart. And there's only the blocks left. When you fill that out, we're going to have a big celebration. So they lean into the stretch, they see the value in it, and it's not drudgery. So right. you kind of can have your cake and eat it too, but it really does have to be for purpose. Like what I just said, well, they're young. I want them to get this boring rote crap out of the way because it's easy for their brains. Okay, but you don't have to do it boring.
Right. Yeah. People, this is like, we're kind of getting into like productivity psychology now, but when people like, you have to be motivated in order to consistently do hard things. Like I'll use an example. Like I love weightlifting and I love doing CrossFit, and both of those things are really unpleasant. Like you get, you're on your 5th set of lifting weights and you're just like, this is really painful and I don't want to be here right now. But there's also a part of me that loves it. And that's why I keep doing it. And if I didn't have this love for the process, and I also didn't want the end result of like, I want to be stronger because it is useful and it feels good and I can do more fun things when I'm strong, I would never subject myself to this unpleasantry. But I have an innate appreciation of the process. I like it. And I have a goal that I'm working towards. And so I do the hard thing. But I see so many people start their weightlifting journeys and then drop off after a month because it's unpleasant and they're not really innately motivated. They're doing it because they think they should be. And that's a recipe for disaster. Like you see it all the time. Every January, people post about their New Year's resolutions. How many people actually follow through on those New Year's resolutions? Most people don't, because they're doing this for this very arbitrary, kind of external, like, I think I should run a marathon this year, so I'm going to. And they just fall off of it because they don't actually care. And the same is true for kids. Like most of the things that we have kids do in school, if we weren't there playing an enforcer role, Like if teachers weren't being police officers making them do the thing, it's like, you must do this or you go to jail, then they wouldn't do it. And we're teaching kids all these awful habits about what learning is and what to expect it to be, because it's always this thing where it's like, well, you should do this now. It doesn't matter if you actually care about the results or not. I don't care if you think that it's boring to be stronger, or you don't want to be stronger, or you'd rather be learning how to run a marathon instead of lift weights. You'd rather be building lean distance muscle. Like, doesn't matter. You're lifting now. And they're just like, okay, I guess I'm doing this because you're making me. Like we're teaching kids that that's what learning is, and that like the meta lesson is just as detrimental as the more specific, obvious lessons of like math is abhorrent and reading is awful and spelling is boring. And that meta lesson is also really, really detrimental.
Well, and none of those things is, true in that way. And you mentioned before, talking with teachers or having teachers say, oh, that's not true, we change all kinds of things. But what I notice is, if students push back, as they're naturally going to do, if they're in what's effectively a prison, okay, like they can't leave, they're required to be there, and there are all these arbitrary things they have to do, they have to wait, they have to ask to go to the bathroom, all this stuff. And then you say, and now is the time when we do math, or now is the time when we do whatever it is. And they push back even a little. What I don't see, in part because it's not really possible in the school format, is I don't see them saying, okay, well, how can we construct this environment so that individual students can approach this topic? If this happens to be math class, how can we listen to what the student needs as far as learning math? They take it more to mean, oh, we need to back all the way up and just reward them for showing up. We need to back all the way up and lower the standards of performance in this same class. So we're not going to really change the class except to make it easier. So then it's like they go 180 degrees the other way. Like we've gone from school should be hard to school is too hard and it's traumatizing and scary and bad. And so we need to like reward them for deigning to grace us with their presence and not
what I mean at all.
And exactly, that's not what you mean. That's not what I mean. And yet that is the actual school institution's answer is this: the standards are too hard. The standards are too high. It's like, no, the standards are standards. And that's the problem.
Right.
So all you're doing is you're taking the same thing and you're just like moving it around instead of changing it. And we're saying, do away with having a standard that goes across every single kid arbitrarily at age, fill in the blank,
exactly,
has to do this particular subject. There is no opportunity in school to go down a rabbit hole as an individual. There is no opportunity to design your own project-based experience relative to math. So they'll tell you, we have project-based learning. I'm like, imposed upon them. So if you're a kid like me who as a high school kid, for example, hated project-based learning, the older I got, the more I wanted book learning, the more I wanted worksheets, the more I wanted things that I could just do and get out of the way, whatever, especially in subjects I didn't like. It wasn't until after college that I rediscovered project stuff. But if somebody had tried to impose that on me or go work with a group, why don't you just kill me? Because I really hate group work. And that's their answer now for everything, is, well, we'll just put kids in group and have them learn from each other. So their changes are sort of cosmetic, and they're just trading one standard approach for another standard approach for another arbitrary timeline. And they're missing the forest for the trees. And what that is that these are little individual trees. It's not a big blob of green.
No, it is not at all. And I think the watering down of the standards really bothers me too, because the point, and I want to be very clear about this, the point that I am making is not we're pushing kids too hard to do all of these hard things. Like, I think most kids should be pushed harder than they are in the right context. And I want to be very clear about like what I mean by this too, because I don't want people to hear me say that and say, okay, I'm just going to go drill my kids harder with all this stuff. That's not at all what I mean. But we force kids to do all of this meaningless stuff that they don't care about and they're not ready for, or like maybe they're intellectually ready to grasp it, but they're not ready from a motivational standpoint. It's just not time yet. But we fail to give kids the space that they need to be pushed in any meaningful way towards developing responsibility, developing agency, learning how to actually go out and make things happen in the world. Kids are capable of so much more than we give them credit for. And when you give them the space to actually go solve problems, they can take that and run with it. And they will learn so many of these common core things that parents stress out about through the process of going and chasing these big, hairy, audacious goals. Like, have your kid go start a group in their community. If they're like, I want a social group that, like, I want a book club, or I want a writing club, or I want a drama club, or whatever, like, let them go start
skateboarding club, or parkour club, or cycling club. It could be anything.
Let them go start something and go through all of the motions of saying, okay, I want to market this somehow. So I need to write marketing materials. I need to learn how to publish them somewhere. I need to learn how to find the right people to get this in front of. I need to learn how to negotiate for a space for us to meet. I have to make sure like all our logistics are set up for our actual meeting. Maybe I need to get everybody's email address so I can send follow-up emails with details on the next meeting. So I have to have like some setup for that. Like, you're walking them through, or they're walking themselves through all of these different real world skills that they need to learn. They're manipulating the world around them in a meaningful way, which is really what school is designed to teach you to do. Like, that's the point of your education, is to learn how to manipulate the world that you're living in the way that you want, how to have an impact somehow. And they're learning all this stuff in the process in a way that's incredibly meaningful. And I think we don't give kids nearly enough space to do that sort of thing. Like, if your kid, I remember I did this. This was a terrible idea. But when I was in elementary school, I really wanted a place to ice skate outside in the winter. And our local park had these roller skating rinks. And I was like, I'm going to write to the town council or whatever, and I'm going to add the township or whatever, and I'm going to advocate for like turning one of these into an ice rink in the winter. I don't think that like even works. This was not like a well-researched idea at all. But I was like, I'm going to go do a bunch of research and see if we can do this. Like, I'm going to learn how to write a letter. And my mom was like, so here's how you write a like to whom it may concern type of letter. I was like, that's fancy. Like, I'm going to go do a bunch of research. I'm going to figure out who I'd have to reach out to. Like, is this possible? What would I include in a proposal? Right. And it never like actually went anywhere because it wasn't a good idea. Right. But like, let your kids chase stuff like that when they have an idea. Like, maybe they'll have an idea that actually is something that's possible, and they can go try to create that change again in the world around them. And so
immediately around them. We're not advocating for the activist, change the world idea on the grand scale. They don't know enough yet, but they can start a lemonade stand. They can walk dogs. They can, and we're talking entrepreneurship, or they could just decide, like you said, that they ought to make an ice rink, or I ought to let the frozen pond be inspected to see if you could skate on it or whatever. But I did want to touch on something while you're speaking, because I'm listening to you and the things that you're saying, and I'm thinking about my own kids. And probably some people listening, especially those who are pulling their kids out of school. So they've been, for lack of a better word, kind of damaged. And what I mean by that is they've been conditioned out of their natural state of curiosity and their natural love of learning that is inborn in all of us, to, with varying degrees of ambition. And I'll get to that in a second, but it's a natural inclination to learn. And so they have even less ambition to do the kind of things that you're describing than you would ordinarily have. And not everybody is super ambitious. So what do I mean by ambition? Ambition, I would describe as, the kind of drive that a person has to achieve a thing, whatever that is. Okay. It runs the gamut from mastering some kind of knowledge or information to, flipping your skateboard and landing on it or whatever. I mean, whatever. You just have to have a goal and the drive to achieve the goal. And modern kids, especially those who've spent any time in formal school, are probably some of the least ambitious people that we've ever seen in our society. It's been almost like drummed out of them. And then when you add technology, that adds to it. So what I would say is when you're hearing all this, if the thought crosses your mind, like, well, how am I going to get my kid to want to do any of that? Don't beat yourself up, and don't feel like your kid, needs to be poked and prodded and threatened and cajoled and bribed and whatever. This is where we talk about things like deschooling. This is where we talk about going, letting them go down rabbit holes, let them do the things that they really truly enjoy. Again, off the tech. You are going to have to be a police officer when it comes to the tech. There's no other way around. It's a very passive form of learning and entertainment until they get their ambition back. Then they could potentially use it for good. But you've got to allow them that slight discomfort of boredom and the sense that nothing in particular is expected of them other than to not just sleep all day. Okay. In order for this to come back, it's been dampened, right? And even in little kids in the elementary age, if your child is more quiet or wants to follow, there are children who want to see what others are doing or what you're doing, or they want you to tell them what to do. That's okay. Like, it's okay. Not every person is a miniature entrepreneur, right? Not every person has mad driving ambition. So
not
then
everybody should either. The world
not
would
everybody
fall
should.
apart if everyone was entrepreneurs.
Exactly. So then maybe the thing to do is just to acknowledge that. If you see that your child is like, I just want to read books, or I want to draw pictures, or I don't care if it's the best picture I ever did, and I want to just draw more pictures. Go with that. Like, I would say go with that. Let them understand that the world needs people like them too, and what I do with kids like that is talk to them more about what they would like their life to be. Like, they're thinking about their dream in a more their sort of future, less about a set of achievements or a role they want to play, and more about what makes you happy. Like, where would you like to spend most of your time? And when they say, like, out in nature, or I like cities, or whatever, because the person without ambition really just wants a life. They're not looking for a thing or a set of roles to play or whatever. And our society, especially our school-based world, does not provide outlets for those kids at all. There is no way for them to explore just living. Because there is something to be said for just making a living. You don't need to have a career. You don't need to have the specific path that you're following. You can say, like, well, what are you good at? And what do you like to spend your time doing? What kinds of people do you like to be around? Okay, well, here are like 10 or 12 things that you could do, today, next week, in your life, or whatever. And then spend your life doing what you want. Right. I think we've spent way too much time pushing kids to have ambition, when some of them just don't, and they want to know that that's okay. And part of it is this pushing them into subject matters has a tendency to be attached to messaging like, this is useful for a job, for your future. You're going to need to do X, Y, Z. And there are a lot of kids who are like, that's not going to connect. That's not going to be motivating for them. Am I making sense? I'm having a hard time explaining what I mean by ambition and non-ambition, but I think they go together.
No, this definitely makes sense. And I think, again, there's this system. The system, like all systems, is designed for the middle. It's designed for the average. And when you have a system that's designed for the average, basically the goal is to make it kind of fit as many people as possible. But it's not directly catering to anyone. And there are some people that it doesn't help at all. And there are some people that it's actually detrimental to. And I think this is really, really true with sort of like the life outcomes that it's trying to set kids up for, and the subject matter that it's teaching. But there are a lot of kids that totally get left behind. And I think you're spot on that kids who aren't super purpose driven definitely get left behind. And I think even for kids who are purpose driven, it can be really detrimental. Like, I, at this point in my life, am a very purpose driven person, but I was not always clear on what my purpose was. In fact, there were seasons of my life where I had no idea what my purpose was, or I thought that there was, like, I could see, like, in a decade what I thought I might want to be doing, but I had no idea in the short term. And it caused me a lot of unnecessary stress and anxiety to feel like I needed to figure out what my purpose was, when in reality, as things naturally unfolded over the course of my educational career and then my adult career, like it wasn't important for me to know in the early stages, and it emerged as we went along. And I think this idea of emergent versus prescriptive is so important for parents to understand, because the school system is extremely prescriptive and it really wants to force you into a track because it's simplest for them. It's like, okay, you're this kind of thing, you go here. You're this type of thing, you go here. When really, naturally, people's life trajectories are very emergent most of the time. And I think it's going to trend more and more in that direction as our world evolves and careers become more fluid and new types of things emerge at a faster and faster rate that we just like can't anticipate in terms of types of work that people are going to be doing. This emergent,
and yet the system is going to fight back twice as hard.
Of course, because
so they're going to be trying to be
to survive. Yeah,
right. The system's goal is to survive, and so the system is going to try to structure things to make us more predictable. And what that means is they've got to make us first be programmed or controlled, and then they can predict what we're going to do next, and it'll get more prescriptive, not less. And that's what part of why I've been nudging people to homeschool, because the amount of prescription going on right now, which sometimes includes medication. If you're a little too individualistic, we might need to apply you with some drugs,
literal prescriptions, yes.
Literal prescriptions. Then it's hurting more and more kids, and they don't want us to go where society and humankind is naturally evolving, which is to be less and less prescriptive. There's a battle right now going on between what happens organically with human beings in terms of how we've evolved and with the technology in a good way, and then how the old system, the people who like systems and wanted the technology to help them make us even more predictable and regimented, don't want us going there. So it's like this. So when we say, give your kids that time and space, whatever, you're also doing you're being a little rebellious. It's very good for your children. Yeah. It's extremely nurturing, wonderful for them. You're giving them a gift of, their childhood back, their mind to freely explore and learn, and probably to have a lifelong love of learning as a consequence. So that's wonderful for them as just from an interpersonal standpoint, but you're also engaging in a little bit of rebellion against the system while you do it. Would you agree?
Oh, absolutely. Well, you have to understand the nature of both of the entities at play. So the truest nature of a child is to be very curious and follow a very emergent path. It's a very much like each action has a consequence that sort of like leads you tumbling down this path of knowledge absorption, which is a very good thing. And it's very natural for most people's lives to unfold that way too. Like we can't predict everything that's going to happen to us and how the world around us is going to change and how our desires and our needs will change. Like we are not designed to have the perfect playbook at birth for like how our exact lives are going to play out, in spite of all of the mythologies throughout the centuries that sort of indicated that was the case. That's not how we experience reality. And the nature of a system, not even school as a whole, but like a system in general, is to sustain itself. Like we are systems, and our purpose is to sustain ourselves. We eat food and we drink water and we reproduce to kind of maintain the future of the system and the type of system. And school is a system, so it's going to operate like it's just its nature to operate like a system. It's going to try to sustain itself for as long as possible. It's not in the nature of most systems to just be like, okay, I give up now, I quit. And so like you just have to understand that that's what's happening, and these are like the different entities that are at play. And like either the system is going to eat the individual, or the individual is going to break free of the system and be able to follow the path that is most natural for this individual entity, which in most cases is the path that may be more challenging at times, but it is the path that is most likely to lead to happiness and success and fulfillment, which most parents want for their kids. So when you look at it that way, it kind of makes it a little bit more objective. It's just like, oh, this is what, like, we can also, characterize it as the evil system. And like, I don't think that's wrong either. But when you look at it this way, it's just like, it's just like, everybody's just sort of like being themselves. And so we just
they're
like
not peaceful. They can't peacefully coexist.
Right.
There are different incentives and different goals. And so the one we were talking about today is that one of the goals of the system is to arbitrarily push kids into subject matter areas at a certain pace, scope, and sequence at an arbitrary chronological age for X number of days a year, across X number of days a week, et cetera, for a certain number of hours a day, and so on. So all of it is prescribed. And the notion I think that parents have is that it's prescribed that way because that's how people learn and that's consistent with what's good for no. In fact, every single one of those assumptions is incorrect. It is absolutely structured the way it's structured around the workaday world of the 9-to-5 world that most parents, most people work in. It was originally designed around that factory life. Okay, so that was that. It was designed to prepare people to function in factories. And factories, as you know, are very regimented in time, punch a clock and do this kind of things. And it really hasn't changed in all the time it's been in existence. But human beings not only don't work in factories anymore to a large degree, but we aren't cogs. We aren't robots. We aren't, but it's not how we are. So no, the system was conceived, designed, invented, etc., to rein us in, to control humans and make us do certain things and learn certain ways, and only so much. So it was never designed around how humans learn. It was never broken up that way because kids are naturally in this stage because they're, oh, look, surely that 14 to 16-year-olds are alike in some way. What? It's like, where did you get that information? Or 14 to 18-year-olds and 11 to 14-year-olds. Like, think about that. 11 to 14-year-olds, middle school. That's like a huge range in those 3 years. And we wonder why middle school is so insane. I mean, the creation of these groupings was largely because, well, let's see, we got a building. It only houses this many people. Let's do it like this. All of it's arbitrary, you guys. And so I guess we're just saying, in essence, like, leave all that to the side and look at your child, and don't think that you have to recreate that. But also, if they're resistant, like Hannah was with the math, that's kind of a sign. Like, listen to them. Right? Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's one more point that we haven't touched on yet, but I think is a really important piece to this argument that we're making, which is that kids don't actually learn that much in K through 5. Like, they're obviously they're learning a ton, but they're developing a ton. But everything that you learn K through 5 can be caught up on very quickly. So, like, there are studies being done right now where people are proving that kids can learn like an entire year of algebra in a month, like 20 hours of work or something. They haven't been published yet, but there's like really cool stuff going on where people are like actually creating the data necessary to substantiate a lot of these points around, like, kids can learn really fast, because we all know it, but it's helpful to have studies to point to where you can say, no, look, actually, here are the numbers. Mm-hmm. But everything in K through 5 that your kid misses, and you hit some inflection point in their journey where for some reason you need them to be like on schedule. You need them to be caught up to where kids are in public school. Either you have to send them to public school, or there's some program that they want to be a part of that requires them to meet these standards. Anything that they don't know, they can catch up on super fast through even free resources like Khan Academy, but there's like all different types of apps and stuff that they can use to catch up on all these basic things super fast. So if you let your kid, like, this is kind of like the piece that you can hold on to where you're like, okay, I have an escape plan if this route doesn't work. Like, if you let your kid, let their interests drive the process for K-5 and beyond, but we're focusing on that here. And you let them do the things that interest them, and they play with the blocks and they sit in the reading corner and they don't do any math worksheets. And then you hit a point where you say, okay, this kid needs to transition into public school, which I think is probably a fear for a lot of parents. Like, we want to put our kid in the alternative school, but what if it doesn't work out long term? There's a lot of resources available that weren't when you were in school that make it very easy. Like, kids have the cognitive capacity to catch up on this stuff really fast, but the tools exist now too. So you have an escape hatch. Like, if you're on this rocket and you're like, this is going in the wrong direction, we need to bail out and like go back to ground zero and try again. It's very easy. Like, you have the parachute to get you there. It's very, very easy for kids to catch up on all of this stuff really quickly, which is important too, because I think a lot of parents are afraid of the repercussions, but it's not.
Well, I want to mention that real quickly. We only have a few minutes left, but because John is saying K-5 are the building blocks for all the rest. Well,
yeah,
this is presupposing the kid is going to do all the rest in a school setting. If you're talking about those building blocks, if you're talking about the kinds of skills the kids learn or the developmental phases that they go through in that age range, that's different. Okay. Yes, obviously it's true. However, what Hannah's saying is that if you have a child who's 7 or 8 and they're still not demonstrating that they're reading chapter books, for example, first of all, you might be surprised at how well they can read, and they might not just be showing you. Okay, that's the first thing. If you're doing the things we're saying, if you're reading to them, surrounding them with books, exposing them to phonics or teaching them phonics, sounding out words as opposed to just going figure it out, they're going to learn to read. They just are. Unless they have dyslexia. Now, if you're really worried, like the kid's 9 and they can't even sound out cat or something, there's a real problem, then go get them checked out. But I'm saying, if they're just not motivated to pick up a big chapter book and read it and they're, 8 years old, I wouldn't panic just yet. As far as the math goes, yes, they're building blocks that they learn, but I want to dispel a myth. And the myth is that this stuff is going on in schools, that K-5 is doing the job. K-5 is not doing the job, and it's doing the job more poorly than it has ever been done. I have seen kids, I've seen K-5 kids, cross my path in the last 5 years or so. And I will go out on a limb and say the ones I've seen who can read, who can do math, were taught at home. And I don't mean homeschooled even. Like, yes, the homeschoolers for sure, 100% they can. The kids who do and they go to school, if you dissect it, mom taught them to read. Mom was reading to them. They probably were reading decently before they even entered the door of the school. They're learning arithmetic at home some kind of way, or the parents are getting it done. It is not happening inside the school. No. I would stake my reputation on that. That is not happening for about 85 to 90% of the kids. It is not happening. I have tutored some kids in the last 5 years who were going into 7th and 8th grade who could not read at a 4th grade level. It's incredibly common. They could not do math. In my district alone, the hypothesis right now, they'll cop to, they will admit that it's about 60% who can't. That's what they'll admit. I submit to you, it's more like 80%. So they're not getting it done. So the parents who are like, I'm worried we won't catch up, whatever. To catch up to what? To kids who are going into middle school and they don't even have a 5th grade education, even though they quote unquote graduated elementary school. You would have to quite literally sleep through the job. If you're homeschooling, you would have to work hard at doing it worse. You can't. Like, if you're doing a half-baked job, your kid is going to be ahead of those kids, even if you unschooled and let them teach themselves, which you're probably not going to do. So it is so bad right now. It's so bad right now.
It's so bad. And it's also like, to John's comment about the building blocks.
Well, he's concerned. This is his concern. He doesn't want parents, and that's why we've been trying to say all along, we are not saying blow it off or ignore it. We're not
saying blow it off, but we're also saying that you shouldn't do it the way that the schools are doing it, because
the way the schools pretend to be doing it. Let's be clear.
Your kid needs to understand, like, at some point in their life, but before they become adults, they're going to need to have strong reading skills. They're going to need to have strong mathematical skills, or at least the basics. They're going to need to be able to like write effectively, they're going to need to know all of this basic stuff. But one, those things can be taught very quickly and with very little effort.
Yes.
Two, when you force kids into it before they are ready, they will learn to resent it. You can have your 7-year-old who doesn't care about chapter books. You can sit them down and force them to read a chapter book, and great, you've checked the box. They can do it now, but they'll probably never want to read a book again because they hated the experience, versus letting them wait until they're ready and then become lifelong readers.
That's correct. My youngest can read, but she was in a public school from kindergarten on. And unlike my 2 older kids who were taught to read at home, the eldest of whom didn't really start reading those chapter books till 7.5, but then she was off to the races and read at a college level by 3rd grade.
I did too. Yeah.
So this one, she was taught to read and like pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed because of kindergarten, all this kind of stuff. Hates to read. She can read, but hates it.
You know what's crazy?
They ruined it. They ruined her reading, her love of reading.
You know what's crazy is that you have kids who take this route of reading when they're ready and they hit 3rd grade and they're reading at a college level. I was like that too. I remember my homeschool evaluator being like, okay, you're college level. And you have kids in college who can't read at a 3rd grade level.
That's right.
Because they were forced through the system. Like it goes in both directions and it's insane. But you don't, like, you're doing so much damage when you're forcing kids into these building blocks. And again, like, we're advocating for a very well-rounded education, but we're advocating for the kids actually getting that education, which you have. I don't know if you're familiar with Andrew Bernstein and his new book, Why Johnny Still Can't Read, Write, and Understand Math. But he talks in the introduction about how he teaches philosophy at a college, and he would like to be exposing his kids to original sources like John Locke, but they can't read at that level.
That's right.
So he can't have college kids reading original sources. Like, how is that even possible? So
that's just, it's not the priority. So, you know, I think unfortunately we have to finish up because I'm limited on time on these Tuesdays, but I think I get your point, John, and we are not saying, so anybody listening to this, we are not saying just, you know, don't care, phone it in, you know, It's not relevant. We're simply saying, be mindful of your child's natural curiosity, feed it, because when you do, the chances are they will use the thing they like to do to learn the thing they don't like to do. And if you're creative and clever about it, you can help them discover ways to do that so they don't resent it. They don't see learning as a chore. Learning's not supposed to be hard. It's, you know, yes, you should persevere and push yourself through hard things, but it doesn't follow that all things should be hard to achieve that. You can make your own hard, like CrossFit. You've got to be motivated. And then when you're doing a hard thing and persevering, you will fully realize the benefit of that and understand what real grit is. So I understand how it's hard sometimes to like square all these seemingly contradictory points, but they're really not in conflict. The reason they seem in conflict is because you have a system that's trying to do it. And that paradigm is so incredibly dominant in our psyches that we struggle to think outside of it. We struggle to think outside of the grade levels and, behind and ahead and gifted and not gifted and this and that and the other. And we got to just stop and look at the kid in front of you and just surround them with a rich environment and say, like, let's learn something. But I hope that covers it for most people.
I think so. I hope so. If not, we can answer questions later.
Yes, very much so. And again, let me encourage people to put into the comments after the show down below, if you have topics that you would love to hear us talk about on Success Without School, please send us suggestions. We come up with these on our own, but we would love to be responsive as well. So if you have things that we haven't covered, we've done, I think, 5 or 6 shows now. You go back and see what we've covered, but we will be probably in the little kid area for a little while longer. And we'll be back again next week. So thank you to everyone for being here today. Thank you, Hannah, so much for a fantastic topic. I bet we could delve more into this, actually. I wish I had more than an hour. So maybe we will. But please like, share, and subscribe, and check her out at Rebel Educator on Twitter and on Substack. And we will see you next week. Bye, everybody.